Well, hello and welcome to the Hope Cymru Talk Show as we reconnect the land of Wales with Jesus Christ. Today, it's a great privilege to be joined by the head of the Welsh Conservative Party, Mr. Darren Millar. Darren, thanks so much for joining us.
It's an absolute delight to be with you, Marcus.
I've been really looking forward to this conversation, Darren. You're a husband, a father, and you're a Guinness World Record holder. What's that Guinness World Record for?
I'm very, very proud of my Guinness World Record. In fact, it's hanging on the wall in my office here. Believe it or not, I found a very, very tall weed at the corner of my street when I was walking the dog. And I thought it was a dandelion because that's what it looked like. And it was very, very high. And I said to my son, who was walking with me, I said, that's got to be the tallest dandelion in the world, Toby. So as soon as I got home after walking the dog, I Googled tallest dandelion in the world, and lo and behold, there was a record. And I said, I think it's bigger than that. So we went and uprooted it. It was on council land, so I was doing them a favour by doing a bit of weeding. So took it home, measured it in the back garden, and lo and behold, it was bigger than the tallest dandelion. So I contacted the Guinness World Records team, and they said, you've got to get an independent witness to see the thing being measured. It's got to be examined by a qualified horticulturalist. And if those tests are met, you can claim your world record. So I got down to Bodnant Gardens, which is a fantastic formal gardens, which has thousands of visitors every year, just outside Conway. And the BBC came along, a friend of mine from the BBC, reporter. So he filmed the thing being measured. He was my independent witness. The head gardener at the Bodnant Garden Centre took a look at this thing, and he said, you know what, it's the tallest weed I've ever seen. He said, but it ain't a dandelion. He said, it's a hawk's beard. So, of course, my heart sank. I've been wanting to break a record since being a child. Always thought it had to do with your DNA or some special talent. And here it was, just my eyesight, seeing this tall weed. So he said, look, we'll fill the papers in anyway and try and claim some record. Anyway, it just happened to be the tallest hawksbeard plant, Crepis bianis, in the world. So they gave me a world record anyway. It was the best birthday present I've ever had, just in the week before my 40th birthday.
That's fantastic, Darren. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I would imagine you've been doing like 2,000 sort of press ups, one finger or something like that. That was great to find the biggest sort of like dandelion almost equivalent. Darren, when life goes fast, and we'll all, unless other things happen, have something written on our gravestones. What's the most important thing that you want to have written on your gravestone to sum up your life, when you die? Presumably, it may not be the world record holding a tallest weed ever.
It won't be. Look, the most important thing in my life, Marcus, is my faith in Jesus Christ. Because I have a before and an after, if you like, before Jesus and then after Jesus. And for me, that was a turning point in my life, which helped to change my worldview and has shaped everything I've done ever since. And I can point back to that pivotal point, and it has led me to where I am today, whether that's in the relationships I have, through meeting my wife, whether that's the children I have and their values and the way that their values have been shaped, or whether indeed it's the role I have now in politics. It motivates me, my Christian faith, to do public service as well as I possibly can do. So that's the most important thing. And, I can remember going to see the grave of a famous evangelist. His name's Charles Alexander. And it was in Birmingham. And on his grave, it said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. And I thought, that's the sort of thing I'd like on my gravestone. But really, I don't care, because I won't be in that grave, of course. I'll be elsewhere.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah, very true, Darren. There's a feeling, isn't there, that politicians have been reluctant to talk about these things, Darren. Now, times are changing, aren't they, at the moment? But just before we think about that, one conservative economist has written that politicians in general, right across the political party, this isn't party politics at all, have a reluctance to engage with the deeper questions of life. It feels as if they're almost not able to, or they're reluctant to do it. This is what he just said, what am I doing here? What's my life or work? Does it have any purpose beyond itself? These are the questions that have always driven human beings, questions that we have always asked and ask still. Occasionally, a mainstream politician seems to acknowledge some of the fears that have begun to bubble up beneath the surface, giving all these questions some urgency, but these acknowledgements come in the form of a terrible, exhausted fatalism. Would you agree with that, Darren, that, right across political parties, there is something of reluctance to engage with the deepest questions of life?
I think, a lot in politics is about short-term opportunism, unfortunately. People don't always make what they know to be the right decisions for the longer term because they fear short-term political consequences. And I think, as a Christian in politics, I have a moral duty to always do what I believe to be right, what is in accordance with my conscience. And I think that that some people do feel a pressure not to be able to speak out about their faith in the political world or in the public sphere, not just in politics, but if they're in other roles as well, in other workplaces. But I would say to them, and to anybody who has an interest in this murky world of politics, that it is perfectly possible for you to live out your Christian walk and Christian life as a politician in any political party. Be true to your values. Some Christians will be Christian socialists, some will be Christian conservatives, others will be Christian liberal Democrats, and that's absolutely fine. People can draw different conclusions in terms of the way that their faith works in their life and their reading of the scriptures. But for me, it's been a relatively straightforward walk. Of course, there are those who will criticize and carp and say that there's no place for faith in politics. But if you have a true faith in Jesus, it's impossible to divorce that from the decisions that you make. And therefore, any Christian in politics is going to be influenced by their Christian worldview. And I think they should be bold and proud about their faith and not hide it under a bushel.
Very good. And how does, personal faith in Jesus Christ, like knowing who he actually is, how does he provide a bigger framework of meaning for you to operate in? So what we're saying is that Jesus isn't just like the founder of another world religion, or he's not just a world leader. He's not just the founder of Western civilization. I mean, that would be something in itself, but he's the founder of all life and then provides meaning for us and a world to operate within.
Well, what I love, Marcus, is that we're not left completely blind in this world about what Jesus taught or how he lived, right? Because it's recorded in 4 Gospels. And there are lots of people who met him and knew him who wrote the New Testament. And the Old Testament, of course, points to him. So when you pick up the Bible and you read the Bible, you can see his example, you can see his teachings, you can see he was God. And from that, it can be your moral compass. So the Bible I take as a moral compass, and I try my best, hopelessly sometimes, but I try my best to follow the teachings of Jesus in everything I do, whether that's my home life, my work life, or any other part of my life. Like everybody, I'm an imperfect human being, but I thank God that he gave me this perfect example that I can aspire to.
Yeah, I love that, Darren, because there's all the kinds of theories and ideas around today. Many people think like the whole universe has come from nowhere and it's going nowhere, and that it's going to explode or it's going to implode or it's going to bounce back at the end. And then they say, well, just make the best of it. And you think, wow, well, that doesn't fill me with much confidence, and there may be all kinds of reasons whereby I'm not able to make the best of it. I'm just not given those opportunities in life. But Jesus brings us into this incredible story and adventure and kingdom which will never end. How did you first get into politics, Darren? I think you were quite young.
I was 15 years old, and my interest was piqued when I was watching the downfall of Margaret Thatcher unfold on the telly as a teenager, and for some reason it triggered this interest in politics. I think what it was, you know, Margaret Thatcher, love her or hate her, was a very big, influential person on the world stage. She was the only prime minister I could remember up until my teenage years, because I was too young to remember her predecessors. And suddenly I saw her, having been this election winner, being turfed out by her own party. And I guess it triggered a bit of a curiosity, and I wanted to learn more about politics. I didn't feel at that time that I was necessarily a conservative, by the way, but it triggered this interest in current affairs. Anyway, John Major became prime minister. He decided to do the right thing, the honourable thing, when there's a shift in leadership, and call a general election. So I got in touch with each of the political parties, the main political parties at that time: Labour, Plaid Cymru, the Liberal Democrats, the Conservatives, and they all sent me a copy of their manifesto. I read them from cover to cover, and I decided, much to my surprise, that the one that best fitted my family and its values was the Conservative Party manifesto. And I say that it was a surprise because my family had always voted Labour. But here was a manifesto that was talking about taking personal responsibility for the decisions that you make. It was talking about hard work being rewarded, and trying to make sure that kids get the best start in life through a decent education. I thought, these are my family's values. So I got in touch with the local Conservative association in the then Clwyd North constituency, got involved in my first election campaign, and I've been involved in the party ever since. So that was my journey into politics.
Things in Wales was once a world leader, Darren. We know that, in times of industrialization, 19th century. Things aren't going so well today. The average income is about £5,000 less than it is across Britain on average. Education stats are quite poor. Almost a third of children grow up in poverty across Wales, and the levels of unemployment, and economic inactivity are very, very high as well. Why do you think those things have happened, Darren?
Well, I would say this. I would say that devolution gave an opportunity to improve the lives of people in Wales, but it hasn't. And it's not devolution's fault. I would say it's the Welsh Labour government's fault. Of course, I'd say that because they've been in charge with their levers on the hands of power, with the support of other political parties. Plaid Cymru in recent years, the Liberal Democrats too. And they have made the wrong political decisions, in my view. And that is what has led to the sort of stagnation of our economy, the poor performance of our health service, and the failure in education standards. Of course, different political parties would make different political decisions, and that would have different consequences. So I want to see this next Senedd election the opportunity for there to be a non-Labour government. And that's what I'm working really hard to be able to deliver, because I do think that you can make different decisions in Wales which are better for the people of Wales, which would transform our economy, our health service, our education system, and all the other public services that the Welsh government is responsible for.
We do need profound change, don't we, Darren? You can look at the stats, but we have been working in Cardiff, doing a sort of food ministry, helping people with that 3 times a week. And there's hundreds, possibly thousands of people have passed through that over the last 5 years. And I've just been astonished the way people's names, that, I can put their face to the name, are struggling in ways that I couldn't really have imagined, just horrific stories, incredibly terrible things happening. And what's almost shocked me more even than that is that many people have given up on any chance of it getting better. You know, there was one person had petrol poured over him. He was set on fire, and then he just like narrowly escaped that, you know, losing his life. But there seemed to be no action taken whatsoever. And he didn't even expect any action to be taken after that. And, you know, there's shops that I go into in Cardiff where the shop assistants actually help the people that are stealing from the shops, help them to carry the bags out. So I've asked them why they do that, and they explained that they're not able to stop them, so they thought that they would help them instead. Somebody else, you know, a couple of weeks ago outside another shop, just punching a man on the ground, you know, and nothing was done, and then they just sort of carried on. That happens all the time, and I could just tell story after story like that, Terence. I see those people, I know their names, I know the suffering and the pain that they're going through. Confidence in politicians in general, Darren, not just, you know, one political party, is very low. There was one survey taken back in 2018, and that was right across 27 countries. And in that, they said that the more than half felt that democracy wasn't delivering, that rights were being infringed, that the countries were being run by out-of-touch elites, and that it didn't really matter who won. Then another poll in the UK in 2021 found that 2/3 thought that politicians were just out for themselves. Why do you think these attitudes have developed, are not just in Wales, not just across Britain, but right across the Western world?
Well, look, it's always been fashionable to bash politicians and leaders, and there will always be those politicians around who the caricature, I'm afraid, does fit. You know, but my experience in politics tells me that the overwhelming majority of elected representatives, whether that's in your local councils or in the parliaments around the world, are people who genuinely are there because they want to try and make a positive difference. It's not an easy life being a politician. Sometimes, you know, you face all sorts of criticism, often unfair. You're in the public eye, and it can be pretty tough. But I think when people make decisions which do not reflect the public's views, that's where they come a cropper. You know, we saw, for example, decisions to implement 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in Wales. Massive uproar, you know, hundreds of thousands of people across Wales signing petitions to say that they didn't want that. And the government arrogantly sort of continued to proceed with changing those speed limits. And that, I think, is where this out of touch thing, that's a good example of a government being out of touch with the people it's supposed to serve. But, you know, those scenes that you describe on the streets of Cardiff and in our cities, and of course it's not just Cardiff, it's elsewhere too, are absolutely tragic. They describe a country which doesn't have proper law and order. They describe a country where people don't face consequences for their actions. And also, ironically, a country where people, unfortunately, are making decisions that they don't want to in terms of having to go to food banks because of terrible poverty. So we've got to get to grips with those things. You know, the police should be doing their job. They should be arresting criminals and taking them to task. And we need to get to grips with the root causes of the poverty that we see around our country. And the biggest cause of poverty is people not being able to get work. So we've got to have a system, including a welfare system, that promotes the benefits of work, gives people dignity and respect so that they don't have to queue in a food bank, and make sure that those people who thieve from hard-working business people, that pushes the cost of everybody's goods up in the shops, because these things have consequences, are taken to task for their actions too. And that will give us a fairer society all round, I think. And that's why the Conservative Party has always been a great champion of the economy, because what we understand is there's no such thing as public money. It's all taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
And the only way you can raise more taxes is if your economy does well and people get paid well, and your economy grows. You can't just keep fleecing people with higher and higher taxes and expect your economy to do well. And you can't just focus your attention on big businesses and tax those to the hilt and expect your economy to do well. That's the socialist way. And what we see, and we're seeing it in our economy now, even just after 12 or so months from the start of the Labour government at a UK level, we're seeing our economy take a hit as a result of their decisions to push up taxes. I say this often, but I'll say it again to you. The Welsh Labour government, which is a socialist government, is like a boa constrictor, squeezing the life out of the Welsh economy. And I think that that's why Wales has higher levels of poverty, lower wages, and frankly, growing unemployment at the moment.
Yeah, if we were to just step back a moment, Darren, to try and reframe things more broadly, do you think that restlessness, there are the things on the surface, of course, but do you think that restlessness and widespread discontent could have something to do with the fact that things are out of proportion? So our expectations of government are too high. Our expectations of church are very low, and our expectations of the living God are non-existent.
Well, I think there's a hopelessness and despair in the world, if I can put it that way. And, I find hope in my faith in God and the trust I put in Jesus. I know that all human beings are flawed and therefore they will make mistakes. So I don't have those very high expectations that politicians will be absolutely perfect and make absolutely perfect decisions. And I think if people understood that politicians are just the same as them, right? They're just normal, everyday people who happen to be in positions of responsibility and will, of course, make the wrong decisions at times, then their expectations will be at a better level. But most importantly, I think, for our society as a whole, people are looking for meaning. They're looking for something that gives them hope every day. Who wants to live? Who wants to just get about living and then die and there's nothing to look forward to? Nobody does, right? So that's what our faith can help give us. It's a completely different attitude towards life. It's a life with a purpose, a life with a meaning, something to get out of bed for every single day. And that's what makes work interesting and any interaction with any other human being interesting and meaningful.
Good. A lot of people would say, Darren, that the Conservative Party has seen something of a demise because, it sort of shifted to the left with Blair and now shifts to the right with Farage. What actually is true conservatism and what are we trying to conserve and on what basis?
Well, for me, the Conservative Party is about freedom. It's about personal choice, personal responsibility. It's about being pro democracy, pro freedom of speech. All of those things, I think, that you would associate with being a conservative. Home-owning democracy, helping people get on in life, giving people a hand up, not always a handout. That's what conservatism is all about. And of course, it's also about conserving our traditions, those traditions and foundations which have served us well over many centuries. And, our country is built on sort of Judeo-Christian values. And I believe that we are successful because of that. And of course, that's what the whole of Western civilization has been built on over the generations. So they're the foundations that we need to make sure are in place that underpin everything that we do, because I think that's what's given us our success in the past, and that's what will cause our greatness in the future.
What did you think about Danny Kruger's speech in the House of Commons in the summer, Darren? There was a lot of attention drawn to that, what he was saying. What do you think about him leaving the Conservative Party in the last few days and joining Reform?
Well, look, I got huge respect for Danny Kruger. I like the man for his Christian convictions and faith. And of course, I was cheering him on over the summer when he was talking about the need for a revival of Christianity in the United Kingdom. Fortunately, we're seeing something of a revival of Christianity, particularly amongst younger people, if we are to believe the statistics. And that's certainly borne out in the church that I attend on the North Wales coast, where we seem to be gathering lots of younger people in particular. So that for me is a great encouragement. Obviously, I was disappointed with Danny's decision to defect to Reform. I don't believe that Reform is a Conservative party or an alternative. They might masquerade as Conservatives from time to time, but it's a party that wants to put up people's taxes, give out more in welfare spending, and nationalise industries. None of those are Conservative values in any way, shape, or form. So I think that Danny and some of the others who've joined the party, Reform Party, will eventually come back to the true Conservative Party, the only Conservative Party that will be on the ballot paper in Wales at the next election, which is the Welsh Conservative Party here and the Conservative and Unionist Party across the United Kingdom.
One of the historians in England, Darren, is saying that we're at a crossroads in the West and in Wales, I suppose, by extension, going left with woke, going right with, Reform, other sort of parties like that, going into an entirely different religious world of Islam, or going back to the source of Western civilization, the Christian church and Jesus Christ himself. Do you think what's happening in the United States and different countries across Europe, that there is a growing conservative resurgence that we could be a part of, and which could spread across Wales as well, which would be more than just a political conservatism, but going back to the true source and to Christ himself and the church?
There's definitely a kickback against the woke agenda, but I see that predominantly on the right, but not exclusively on the right. So there are people on the left who don't like the woke agenda either. And I think, even though they're in a much smaller minority on the left, it's good to have them as allies in terms of trying to address, the excesses of that. There's definitely a resurgence of conservatism going on around the world. As I say, I wouldn't necessarily put Reform in that conservative basket, Marcus. I think that there are, of course, good conservatives in Reform, but as I say, many of their policies are not true to conservative values, and I think it's important to point that out. But the Conservative Party as well is having a renaissance of its conservative values. I mean, one of the first things I did when I became leader of the party here in Wales was to set out what we were for, right? We've been very good in opposition over the years, talking about what we're against. We're against more politicians, we're against reducing speed limits, we're against all sorts of things. But we hadn't really spoken about what we were passionately for. And that's why I said, look, we're pro-family, we're pro-choice, we're pro-business, we're pro-low taxes, we're pro-home ownership, we're pro all of these things, pro-personal responsibility and pro-choice. And if we talk about what we're for a bit more, it might attract people to follow us. And I think that is what is beginning to happen with conservatism really across the globe, is people are talking again about what they are for. And that's what attracts people. It's not necessarily just speaking about what you're against.
Yeah, it's amazing the way how things are framed and how they're understood is so significant, isn't it, Darren? Somebody came up to me just a few days ago and said that they were from a family that wasn't religious in any way, didn't know anything about the Christian faith, and then had started watching a young man in America and watching what he had been doing, following it more and more closely, had become a Christian and come to church. And it was such a sadness to see the tragic death of Charlie Kirk in the United States, the way in which that unfolded. He was growing as an evangelist, wasn't he, Darren? And that's one of the things that's deeply saddened me, the way in which he's been mischaracterized and misrepresented from so many different things. Yeah, we're not going to agree with anybody's politics on everything, but more than anything else, he was a Christian man who had brought many, many people into a living knowledge of Jesus, not just in the United States, but, right across the world, and even in our church in Cardiff. What was your feelings, Dan, as you saw that, terrible tragedy and things as they've unfolded since that.
You know what was horrific, Marcus? Was to see people celebrating a brutal public slaughter of a man who was simply talking about the things he believed in. It was absolutely awful to see those videos of people who were laughing and joking about a man's death. He was a dad, of course, of two young girls, loving husband. And you're right, passionate Christian, passionate champion of free speech. And to see him murdered in that way, and of course those scenes from the Utah Valley University went around the world within seconds, and some in the crowd there were even cheering after he'd been shot. I mean, it's awful, and it shows how divided a society we are. But I raised the issue of Charlie Kirk's death in the Senedd just yesterday, trying to pay tribute to him and saying that it was a timely reminder for us all about the importance of free speech, particularly on university campuses, and calling on the Welsh government to make a statement on the back of the horrific incident we'd seen in America. And I was appalled that there were some in the chamber who had similar reactions to those that I've seen online. There was even a government minister who was heckling at me and tutting that I dared to even raise the death of this individual, who, of course, was a massive influence in the world, including in our own country, particularly to younger people. I mean, my own children, who are both in their 20s now, were devastated by Charlie Kirk's death, because to them he was an inspirational figure, and of course there are many, many more like my kids who have been devastated and affected by the news. But of course his death won't be in vain. One of the things that we do know, if we're believers in the Bible, is that all things work together for good. So I do believe that Charlie's story, his life, will continue to be an inspiration to many, many thousands of people for many, many years to come. And it will draw many people into the kingdom of God.
Yeah, I heard just a few days afterwards, Darren, that about 18,000 people had come forwards to join, sort of turning point organizations in different places across America, which is, hugely encouraging. But let's shoot straight, Darren. It illustrates really where we are. I mean, I think that was one of the things that, besides, how horrific the whole incident was and tragic, that I imagine somewhat naively that we were still in like a world, society, civilization in which people who saw something like that done in cold blood would think that that was wrong, irrespective of, the views of the person that it had happened to. But then, you reflect on it and you think, no, decisions have been taken in Westminster over the last months in which, the brackets at the beginning and the end of human life are being eroded. And then you think, yeah, what it even is to be human anymore is not clear at all. We have, as a society, turned our back on God. And this is where we are, a godless society and lawless as well. And things that we would have imagined are just commonalities that would be universal human decency just aren't there anymore. Do we need to get back to God, Darren? Is that what we need to do more than anything else? Repent, turn away from where we've gone wrong and turn back to him in Wales?
Well, of course, I'd love to see more people get to know the Jesus who's made such a difference in my life. And I think our society would be much better if more people had that opportunity and experienced what I've experienced. I can only talk about my experience, right? What I do know is that if you look back in our history books as a nation, Wales, the time when we had our lowest crime levels was actually during times of Christian revival. The times where we saw relationships problems resolved, debts settled, were times of Christian revival. And some of the most prosperous times in our nation were times when the Christian faith was something that was being zealously followed by the majority of the population. But look, what we are responsible for as politicians is trying to make practical decisions which can have a positive impact on people's lives. So that's what I'm interested in trying to do as leader of the Conservative Party. We're developing a policy platform which aligns with those values I talked about earlier on, and we're looking forward to the Senate elections in May so that we can give people a real choice between more of the same or real, proper, credible change with the Welsh Conservatives.
Yeah, you've got a lot to be getting on with, Darren. Leave revival. I was going to say leave revival to me. Don't leave it to me. Let's leave it to Jesus to revive things across the country. One question off the back of that, with the foundations of Britain, as Danny Kruger well pointed out, back in the summer of 2025, and as we know history, especially we know Welsh history, it's like it is unimaginable to even talk about the history of the nation of Wales without reference to the church and to Jesus Christ, like at every level. And if you go through the Welsh Dictionary of National Biography, like all the main leading characters are all followers of Jesus Christ. Like, what has happened, Darren? Like, why are we in this situation whereby it's felt that, being a Christian must be kept out of the center of decision making, that it's somehow harmful, that, it's got something to answer for. There's some sort of other standard for morality, which means that it's inappropriate to do that. And that everybody who's clever has sort of moved on beyond these things. How have we got to this place, Darren?
Well, look, I think if you look in our history books, Christianity has definitely shaped modern Wales. It's an important part of our heritage, an important part of our history. It's not something that young people learn about much in school, which is a great disappointment. We celebrate all sorts of other aspects of our history and heritage, but for some reason, our Christian faith isn't something which is celebrated today as much as I believe it ought to be. And I think that, we need to try to ensure that young people are educated about these things, about these periods, these spiritual awakenings in Wales, because I think that for many of them it will shock and surprise them to know what generations before have experienced and the impact that had on our society, our economy, and everything else at those times. But what has caused the drift? I think there's a lot of disappointment in stale religion. There's a lot of disappointment in the hypocrisy that people see amongst people who claim to be Christians, and I think that turns a lot of people off. But what I would like people to experience is the great freedom that a relationship with Jesus brings, the experience of the knowledge of sins forgiven, which comes from nowhere else, the great joy that can bring, the purpose and meaning that a relationship with Christ can give you. And I know that that's every Christian's responsibility to try to introduce people to Jesus, to the Jesus that brings those things.
One final question, Darren. If Wales does turn back to Jesus Christ and, the people find their ways back into the churches and chapels as they have done in the past, as is slowly happening, what would that look like, Darren? What would you expect? What impact would that have on Welsh rugby? What would it have on unemployment statistics? What would Wales look like that's fully alive and reconnected with its God?
It's difficult to know, other than if you are a student of history, what you do see is in those periods of spiritual awakening, you saw Jesus on everybody's lips, Jesus at the forefront of everybody's minds, him being the principal point of conversation in the home, better relationships with one another, and a society that seemed much happier and more content with itself. And that sounds like a pretty good Wales to me. So, I very much pray that people would have the experience of getting to know Jesus, more and more people in Wales. And I'm glad, as I say, that appears to be happening, particularly with the sort of younger generation, with the growth in church attendance that we've been seeing in, across not just Wales, but the whole of the United Kingdom. And that appears to be a phenomenon which is happening in other Western European countries as well. And that for me is a great encouragement, because I know that the tide ebbs and flows, but it looks like there's a rising tide at the moment. And I've always wanted to witness a spiritual outpouring, and I think we're on the cusp of one at the moment in Wales, and that gives me great joy.
What an exciting time it is to be alive, Darren. But on Saturday, I must just tell you this little story as we end. A lady came to church in the morning, to collect food, and that was the first time she'd come. And then she came back again to an event that we were running in the evening. And she told me in the evening that when she'd gone home, she got one of those big, sort of French sticks. And then she had some soup as well from church. And then she was able to have that at lunchtime. It just shows really where things are, Darren, that her daughter saw her eating this roll and the soup at lunchtime. And she said to her, "Where did you get that food from? Did you win the lottery?" And then the mum said, "No, I went to church." She'd never been to church before. And I was thinking, that is what it is to win the lottery, really, is that, let's be honest, to come to church, to meet with Jesus Christ. And our longing is that Wales would turn back to him, come to know him again, and it would be able to punch well above its weight again, as it has done so many times in the past, and be transformative, and the valleys would once again sing. Darren, I'm so grateful for your time, so grateful for all that you're doing. May God richly bless you in all you're doing, and we pray that the best days for Wales are still to come.
I say a big amen to that, Marcus, and thank you for all that you're doing to introduce people to Jesus in our capital city of Wales. It's great to know that there are thriving Christian communities that are reaching out to people, serving the communities in which they live, and introducing people to this wonderful Saviour that you and I know. I can still remember the day, 3rd of July, 1994, about 7:30. That's when the scales fell off my eyes. And I know that other people are on that journey too. So Godspeed to you and everyone who travels with you.